He was sitting in seat 1A, holding a ticket that cost more than a brand new car. But when the flight attendant looked at him, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw a target. They denied him his meal, threw his luggage in the aisle, and threatened to have him arrested by the FBI upon landing. They thought he was just another passenger they could bully. They were wrong. They didn't know that while they were serving drinks, he was buying the airline. Stick around to see the moment the most arrogant crew in aviation history realizes they just humiliated their new boss, and the hard karma that hit them at 30,000 feet. The rain lashed against the tarmac at JFK International Airport, blurring the lights of the terminal into streaks of neon and grey. Inside the exclusive lounge of Royal Horizon Airlines, the atmosphere was a stark contrast, hushed, smelling of expensive leather and aged scotch. Marcus Sterling adjusted the hood of his charcoal cashmere sweater. To the untrained eye, he looked like a man who had perhaps stumbled into the wrong room. He wasn't wearing the bespoke Italian suits he usually donned for board meetings at Sterling Dynamics, the multinational conglomerate he had built from the ground up. Today, he was tired. He had just spent 48 hours in intense, secret negotiations in London, finalizing a deal that would shake the aviation industry to its core. He had just acquired Royal Horizon Airlines. The ink on the digital contracts was barely dry. The acquisition wasn't public yet. The press release was scheduled for Monday morning. For now, the world, and the employees of Royal Horizon, thought the airline was still owned by the venture capital group that had run it into the ground with cost-cutting and poor service. Marcus wanted to see the truth of his new investment. He didn't want the red carpet rolled out for Mr. CEO. He wanted to experience the flight as a paying customer. He picked up his carry-on, a battered but incredibly durable leather duffel, and walked toward the gate for Flight 880 to Los Angeles. Zone 1, first class passengers only, the gate agent announced, her voice clipped. Marcus stepped forward. He was the first in line. He held out his phone with the digital boarding pass. The gate agent, a woman named Patricia who was chewing gum aggressively, didn't look at the screen. She looked at Marcus. She looked at his sneakers, rare limited edition Jordans, but sneakers nonetheless. She looked at his hoodie. Then she looked past him. "Sir, I need you to step aside. We are boarding first class," she said, her eyes already scanning for a suit-wearing passenger behind him. "I am first class," Marcus said, his voice deep and calm. He tapped the screen. "Seat 1A." Patricia sighed, a sound of exaggerated exhaustion. She snatched the phone from his hand, her long acrylic nails clicking against the glass. She squinted at it, seemingly looking for a reason to reject it. The scanner beeped green. She didn't hand it back. She shoved it toward him on the counter. "Fine, go," she muttered, not making eye contact. Marcus didn't react. He knew that anger was a luxury he couldn't afford in public spaces. He took his phone and walked down the jet bridge. As he stepped onto the aircraft, the contrast between the marketing brochures and reality became instantly apparent. The Boeing 777 was impressive, but the atmosphere was icy. Standing at the door was the purser, a tall man with a perfectly coiffed blonde pompadour named Gavin, and a flight attendant named Tiffany. Tiffany was adjusting her scarf, looking bored. "Welcome aboard," Marcus said politely, stepping into the cabin. Tiffany glanced him up and down. Her lip curled slightly, a microaggression Marcus had seen 1,000 times before. "Boarding pass," she demanded, extending a hand without a greeting. Marcus showed it again. 1A, she read, her tone implying a mistake. "Are you sure you didn't upgrade at the last minute?" "I booked this ticket 3 weeks ago," Marcus replied. "Is there an issue?" "No," she said, turning her back to him, immediately to smile brightly at an older white man in a suit, entering behind Marcus. "Mr. Henderson, welcome back. It's so good to see you. Let me take your coat." Marcus stood there for a moment, holding his own coat. "Excuse me," he said to Tiffany's back. "Is there closet space for my jacket?" Tiffany didn't turn around. She was busy fussing over Mr. Henderson's lapel. Over her shoulder, she snapped. "Overhead bins are for everyone, sir. Just cram it in there." "Cram it in there," Marcus repeated softly to himself. He found seat 1A. It was a suite, complete with a closing door. He sat down, placing his duffel carefully in the bin. He watched as Gavin, the purser, walked down the aisle with a tray of pre-departure champagne. Gavin stopped at 1B, poured a glass for Mr. Henderson. He stopped at 2A, poured a glass for a young influencer who was already live streaming. He stopped at 2B for an elderly woman. He walked right past 1A. Marcus cleared his throat. "Excuse me?" Gavin stopped and looked back, his face a mask of feigned confusion. "Yes?" "May I have some water, please?" Marcus asked. "We're a bit busy with boarding, sir," Gavin said, his smile not reaching his cold blue eyes. "I'll get to you once we're in the air. If there's any left." "If there's any water left?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. "In first class. We have a limited supply of the Fiji water," Gavin lied smoothly. "Regulations." He walked away before Marcus could respond. Marcus leaned back in the leather seat. He pulled out his phone, deactivated the flight mode for a second, and opened a secure messaging app. He sent a single text to his chief of operations, David Thorne. Message: "Run a full background check on crew of Flight 8080. Purser Gavin, attendant Tiffany, and notify legal I might be making some personnel changes before we land." He locked the phone. The plane hadn't even pushed back from the gate, and the war had already begun. The aircraft leveled out at 35,000 feet. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Usually, this was the time when first-class service shined. Hot towels, warm nuts, the smell of expensive catering. Marcus was hungry. He had skipped breakfast to make the early meetings, relying on the guarantee of the chef's table menu that Royal Horizon advertised so heavily. Tiffany came down the aisle with the meal cart. She moved with a practiced elegance, smiling and chatting with the passengers in rows 2 and 3. "For you, Mrs. Vance." "The sea bass," Tiffany cooed, placing the porcelain plate down. "And another glass of Chardonnay?" "Lovely, thank you, dear," the woman replied. Tiffany moved to 1B. "Mr. Henderson, your filet mignon, medium rare, just as you like it." "You're an angel, Tiffany," Henderson chuckled. Then she reached 1A. The smile vanished. It was like a shutter clicking closed. She looked at her clipboard, then at Marcus, then back at the clipboard. "We have the pasta or the chicken salad," she said flatly. Marcus frowned. "I pre-ordered via the app," he said. "The lobster thermidor. I have the confirmation email right here." Tiffany sighed, resting her hip against the armrest of his suite. It was a posture of total disrespect. "Look, sir, the app glitches all the time. We didn't get the order. We only load enough lobster for the passengers who are confirmed." "I am confirmed," Marcus said, his voice tightening. "I paid full fare for this seat. That includes the meal selection." "Well, we don't have it," she said, her voice raising enough for the cabin to hear. "Do you want the pasta or not? You're holding up the service." Marcus looked across the aisle. Mr. Henderson was slicing into his steak, watching the exchange with amusement. "I saw you load the galley," Marcus said calmly. He had, in fact, been watching through the open curtain while using the lavatory earlier. "I saw 4 lobster trays. There are 4 passengers in first class. Where is my meal?" Tiffany's face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with anger. "Are you accusing me of stealing?" "I'm asking you to do your job," Marcus said. I would like the meal I paid for. Or I would like to speak to the purser." "Gavin is busy in the cockpit," she snapped. "And I don't appreciate your tone. You're being aggressive." The word hung in the air. Aggressive. It was the weaponized word used against men like Marcus constantly. He kept his hands visible, resting on his lap. He kept his voice low. "I am sitting down. I am speaking quietly. I just want my dinner, Tiffany." She glared at him, then reached into the bottom of the cart. She pulled out a foil-wrapped tray, not a porcelain plate. It was a coach meal. She slammed it onto his tray table. "There, chicken. Eat it." She spun around and marched back to the galley. Marcus stared at the foil tray. He didn't open it. He carefully took his phone out and snapped a photo of the tray, then a photo of Mr. Henderson's steak across the aisle. From the galley, voices drifted out. They hadn't closed the curtain fully. "Who does he think he is?" Tiffany's voice was shrill. "Demanding lobster. I gave the extra one to Captain Miller. He said he was starving." "Don't worry about it, Tiff," Gavin's voice replied. "Guys like that, they probably used miles or a stolen credit card to get the seat anyway. He'll be lucky if we don't have security waiting for him." Marcus felt a cold rage settle in his chest. It wasn't just the food. It was the theft. It was the casual assumption that he didn't belong, that he was a fraud. He pressed the call button. 2 minutes passed. No answer. He pressed it again. Nothing. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He walked to the galley. Gavin and Tiffany were leaning against the counter, eating chocolates and laughing. When Marcus appeared, they stopped. "I need to speak to the captain," Marcus said. Gavin straightened up, wiping chocolate from his mouth. He stepped into Marcus's personal space, towering over him. "You need to sit down, sir. The captain is flying the plane." "The captain is eating my lobster," Marcus corrected him. "And I want to file a formal complaint regarding the theft of service and the discriminatory behavior of this crew." "Discriminatory?" Gavin laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Careful with those words. That's slander. Now, go sit down before I write you up for interfering with a flight crew. That's a federal offense, Buddy." "My name isn't Buddy," Marcus said. "It's Marcus Sterling, and I suggest you remember it." "Sterling?" Tiffany snorted. "Like the silver?" "Yeah, right. Sit down, or we're diverting the plane." Marcus stared at them. He realized they were too far gone. Logic wouldn't work. Protocols wouldn't work. They needed a shock to the system. "Fine," Marcus said. "I'll sit." He turned and walked back to his seat. But he didn't sit immediately. He opened his laptop. He connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, the premium, high-speed tier. He logged into the Royal Horizon internal server. As the new owner, he had been granted God Mode access by the IT department just 3 hours ago. It allowed him to view crew manifests, disciplinary records, and live operational data. He pulled up the file for Flight 880, pilot in command, Captain Richard Miller. Purser, Gavin O'Connell. Flight attendant, Tiffany Reed. He saw their employment history. Tiffany had 3 prior complaints for rudeness in the last year, all dismissed by management. Gavin had a citation for alcohol consumption on a layover. Marcus opened a command prompt. He couldn't fire them from 35,000 feet. That required HR protocols. But he could do something else. He could send a message to the cockpit printer. 20 minutes later, the curtain to the cockpit burst open. Captain Richard Miller stormed out. He was a large man, red-faced, with silver hair and the swagger of someone who hadn't been told no since 1995. He wasn't wearing his hat. He looked furious. He marched straight to seat 1A. "You," Miller barked, pointing a thick finger at Marcus. "You're Sterling?" The entire first-class cabin went silent. Mr. Henderson put down his fork. The influencer lowered her phone. I am, Marcus said, not looking up from his laptop. Who the hell do you think you are, hacking my aircraft? Miller shouted. Spittle flew from his mouth. I didn't hack anything, Marcus said calmly. I sent a priority memo. Did you read it? I got a piece of paper telling me to verify passenger manifest for VIP status, Miller sneered. And asking why the lobster count is off. You think you can intimidate me? I'm the captain of this vessel. Under maritime and aviation law, I am God up here. Actually, Marcus said, closing his laptop and finally looking up, his eyes hard as flint. You are an employee up here. Your job is to transport passengers safely, not to eat their food and threaten them. Miller grabbed the armrest of Marcus's seat, leaning in dangerously close. Listen to me, boy. One more word, one more button pressed, and I will have you zip-tied and thrown in the back galley. When we land, I'm filing charges. Interfering with a flight crew, cyber terrorism. You're going to prison. Tiffany was standing behind the captain, smirking. She looked triumphant. I told you he was trouble, Captain. He's been aggressive since he boarded. I have it all on record, Gavin added, stepping up. He threatened us. It was a perfect storm of lies. They were closing ranks. You're going to prison, Miller repeated. Now give me that laptop. It's evidence. He reached for Marcus's computer. Marcus moved his hand, blocking the grab. Touch my property, Captain, and you will never fly a kite again, let alone a Boeing. Miller recoiled, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. That's it. Gavin, get the restraints. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from awkward to terrified. The influencer gasped. Oh my God, are they arresting him? Wait, a voice came from row 2. It was the elderly woman, Mrs. Vance. She stood up, her frail hand gripping the seat back. This is absurd. The young man hasn't done anything. I've been watching the whole time. You people have been horrible to him. Sit down, Mum, Miller shouted at her. This is a security issue. It's not security, it's racism, she yelled back, surprisingly loud. Enough, Miller roared. He turned back to Marcus. Gavin, restrain him. Now! Gavin pulled a pair of heavy plastic zip ties from his pocket. He moved toward Marcus. Marcus stood up. He was 6'2", taller than Gavin, and broader than the captain. He didn't raise his fists. He simply stood with a presence that filled the small aisle. If you touch me, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a subsonic rumble, you will be making the biggest mistake of your lives. I am asking you, Captain Miller, to return to the cockpit and fly this plane. We have 2 hours to New York. Do not escalate this. Miller hesitated. He saw the camera phone of the influencer pointed right at them. He saw the defiance in Marcus's eyes. He saw the witnesses. Fine, Miller hissed. We'll handle this on the ground. Gavin, watch him like a hawk. If he moves, drop him. Miller stormed back to the cockpit. Gavin stood at the front of the aisle, crossing his arms, staring at Marcus. Marcus sat back down. His heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. He picked up his phone. He had a signal again. He dialed a number. It was the personal cell of the Director of Operations at JFK. This is Sterling, Marcus whispered into the phone, turning his back to Gavin. Code Black. I need airport police and the board of directors waiting at gate 42. Yes, all of them. And bring the termination papers. We have a situation. He hung up. The rest of the flight was a silent torture. Gavin didn't serve him drinks. Tiffany didn't clear his trash. They treated him like a prisoner transport. But Marcus didn't care. He watched the flight map on the screen. Distance to destination, 400 miles. Time to justice, 45 minutes. He closed his eyes and visualized the landing. He wasn't just going to fire them. He was going to dismantle their world. But he didn't know that they had one last trick up their sleeves, a trick that would nearly ruin him before he could say a word. The silence in the first-class cabin was heavier than lead. 40 minutes remained until landing. Marcus had returned to his work, typing furiously, documenting every interaction, every timestamp. He wasn't just angry, he was methodically building a legal guillotine. But in the galley, panic was setting in. Tiffany was pacing the small space, her hands shaking as she held a plastic cup of water. "He said he's calling the board," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Gavin, what if he actually knows someone? What if he's a secret shopper?" Gavin, who was leaning against the coffee maker, shook his head, though sweat was beading on his forehead. "Look at him, hoodie, sneakers. He's nobody. He's bluffing. He probably Googled the board of directors' names." "But the captain took his laptop," Tiffany hissed. "If he files a report—" "He won't file a report if he's in jail," Gavin said, his eyes darkening. A sinister idea was forming in his mind. He looked at Tiffany, then at the pot of fresh, scalding, hot coffee. "Listen to me. It's his word against ours, and right now it's 3 against 1. The captain is already on our side. We just need a reason for the police to drag him off immediately before he can open his mouth." "What kind of reason?" Tiffany asked. "Assault," Gavin whispered. "Physical assault on a crew member. That's a federal felony with a mandatory prison sentence. If we say he attacked you, nobody listens to him. He goes to holding, we go home, and by the time he gets a lawyer, we've already filed the paperwork." Tiffany hesitated. That's perjury, Gavin." "It's him or us, Tiff," Gavin snapped. "Do you want to lose your job? Do you want to lose your pension? Because if he talks, we're done. But if he's the crazy, violent passenger in 1A, we're heroes." Tiffany looked through the curtain at the back of Marcus's head. She thought about her rent, her car payments, and her pride. Her face hardened. "What do I do?" "Go to the bathroom," Gavin instructed. "Splash water on your face. Redden your eyes. I'll tell the captain you're too shaken to work. We'll say he grabbed you when you tried to take his trash." 10 minutes later, the intercom crackled to life. But it wasn't the usual "prepare for landing" announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller from the flight deck. We are beginning our initial descent into Los Angeles. However, due to a serious security incident involving a passenger in the forward cabin, we are asking all passengers to remain seated with seatbelts fastened. Do not, I repeat, do not, stand up for any reason until authorities have boarded the aircraft." Marcus looked up. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Security incident? He looked around. The cabin was calm. Then he saw Gavin standing at the front of the aisle, arms crossed, staring directly at him with a smug, predatory grin. Behind Gavin, Tiffany was sitting on the jump seat, holding a tissue to her face, her shoulders shaking in exaggerated sobs. "What is this?" Marcus asked aloud. "Silence!" Gavin barked. "You are to remain silent until the authorities arrive." "I haven't done anything," Marcus said, looking at Mr. Henderson across the aisle. "You see this, right?" Mr. Henderson looked uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat, turning his body away from Marcus. I don't want to get involved, son." "He didn't do anything," Mrs. Vance's voice piped up again from row 2. "That girl is acting. One more word from you, ma'am, and you'll be charged as an accomplice," Gavin shouted. The threat worked. Mrs. Vance shrank back into her seat, terrified. Marcus realized the trap had snapped shut. They weren't just being rude anymore. They were framing him. He looked at his phone. 5% battery left. He had sent the message to his team, but he had no way to know if they had received it in time. The plane banked sharply. Below, the sprawling lights of Los Angeles came into view. To most, it looked like a city of dreams. To Marcus, it looked like a jurisdiction where he was about to be processed as a violent felon. He took a deep breath, closed his laptop, and placed his hands on his knees, palms open. He knew the drill. When the police came, any movement would be interpreted as a threat. He had to be perfect. He had to survive the next hour to destroy them in the next 24. The wheels touched the tarmac with a violent screech, the braking harder than usual. The aircraft didn't taxi to the terminal gate immediately. Instead, it rolled to a stop on a remote section of the apron, far from the other planes. Through the window, Marcus saw the flashing red and blue lights. Not one car, 6, 2 airport police cruisers, 2 LAPD units, and a black SUV. Perfect, Marcus whispered. He hoped the SUV was his people. The seatbelt sign turned off, but nobody moved. The tension was suffocating. The main cabin door opened with a hiss. The cool night air rushed in, followed instantly by the heavy thud of boots. "Police, stay in your seats." 4 officers stormed the first-class cabin. 2 were regular airport cops. 2 were dressed in tactical gear. They had their hands on their holsters. Captain Miller stepped out of the cockpit. He looked grave, like a man carrying a heavy burden. He pointed a shaking finger at seat 1A. "That's him," Miller said, his voice trembling with feigned emotion. "The one in the hoodie. He assaulted my flight attendant." "Hands! Let me see your hands!" the lead officer shouted, advancing on Marcus. Marcus didn't flinch. He kept his hands visible. "I am complying," he said calmly. "I am the victim here. Check the cameras." "Up! Get up!" The officer grabbed Marcus by the shoulder, yanking him out of the leather seat. "Hey, easy!" Marcus snapped as his arm was twisted behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs bit into his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited, pushing Marcus toward the aisle. As they dragged him forward, Marcus passed the galley. Tiffany was still sitting there, crying. When she saw Marcus in cuffs, she looked up. For a split second, the crying stopped, and a small, cruel smile played on her lips. "You monster," she whimpered loudly for the benefit of the police. "I was just trying to do my job." "He's dangerous," Gavin added, stepping in to block Marcus's path slightly. "Watch out, officer. He knows martial arts or something. He threatened to kill the pilot." "Move!" The officer shoved Marcus forward. Marcus was paraded through the door. He had to duck his head to exit. He walked down the portable stairs that had been rolled up to the plane. The cool wind hit his face. The humiliation was total. Passengers in the window seats were filming. The crew was watching from the doorway, looking down at him like royalty watching a peasant execution. Captain Miller stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head in mock disappointment. At the bottom of the stairs, the police shoved Marcus toward one of the cruisers. "Get in," the officer said, opening the back door. "Wait!" A voice cut through the noise of the jet engines. It was a sharp, commanding voice. It didn't come from a police officer. A man in a sleek black suit stepped out of the black SUV parked near the police cars. He was followed by 2 other men and a woman, all dressed in impeccable business attire. The man in the front was David Thorne, Marcus's chief of operations. "Officer," David said, holding up a hand, "I wouldn't put him in that car if I were you." The police officer paused, hand on Marcus's head. "Who are you? Step back. This is an active crime scene." "I am David Thorne, General Counsel for Sterling Dynamics," David said, his voice calm but projecting authority. "And the man you are manhandling is Marcus Sterling." "I don't care if he's the Pope," the officer spat. "He assaulted a flight attendant. Captain's orders are to arrest him." "The captain," David said, walking closer, "is about to be unemployed. And if you put Mr. Sterling in that car based on the word of a crew that is currently under internal investigation for fraud, your department will be facing a lawsuit that will bankrupt the city." The officer hesitated. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the expensive suit of the lawyer. Then he looked up at the plane, where Captain Miller and Gavin were watching, their smiles starting to fade as they noticed the black SUV. "What is going on?" the officer asked, loosening his grip on Marcus slightly. Marcus straightened up. He shook his shoulders, adjusting his hoodie. He looked the officer in the eye. "Officer, I am the owner of this airline," Marcus said. "I bought Royal Horizon 48 hours ago. Those people up there didn't assault me. They refused me service, stole from me, and when I threatened to report them, they fabricated a crime." The officer blinked. "You own the airline?" "Check the tail number," Marcus said, nodding at the massive plane. "Registration N880RH. It is owned by a holding company called Blue Sky Ventures. Blue Sky is a subsidiary of Sterling Dynamics. I am the CEO of Sterling Dynamics." David Thorne stepped forward and handed the officer a tablet. "Here is the bill of sale, the corporate structure, and Mr. Sterling's identification. You are arresting the wrong man." The officer looked at the tablet. He scrolled. He looked at Marcus's ID photo on the screen. He looked at the handcuffed man. The color drained from the officer's face. "Oh, damn." He quickly unlocked the handcuffs. "Mr. Sterling, we were told it was a level 4 assault." Marcus rubbed his wrists. "I know what you were told. Now I need a favor." "Anything, sir," the officer stammered. Marcus turned and looked up at the top of the stairs, where Captain Miller, Gavin, and Tiffany were now leaning over the railing, looking confused and terrified. They couldn't hear the conversation, but they saw the handcuffs come off. They saw the police officer step back and salute. "I need you to escort me back onto my plane," Marcus said, his voice like ice. "I have a crew to debrief, and I want the passengers to witness it." David Thorne handed Marcus a blue folder. "The papers are ready, sir. Termination for cause. Effective immediately, for all 3 of them." Marcus took the folder. He looked at the stairs. "Let's go." Captain Miller was still standing at the top of the stairs, a smug grin plastered on his face. He watched as the police officer unlocked Marcus's handcuffs near the black SUV. He squinted against the floodlights. "What are they doing?" Gavin asked, peering over Miller's shoulder. "Why are they taking the cuffs off? They should be shoving him in the car." "Probably checking for weapons," Miller said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Don't worry, he's done." But then, the unthinkable happened. The police officer stepped aside and held the door open. Not the car door, but the gate to the stairs. Marcus turned around and began to walk back up the steps. He wasn't alone. David Thorne and the 2 other executives flanked him, carrying briefcases like weapons of war. The police officers followed behind them, acting as a security detail. Miller's grin vanished. "Why is he coming back?" Marcus reached the top of the stairs. He looked Miller in the eye. The captain, a man who had felt like a god 10 minutes ago, suddenly felt very small. "Step aside, Captain," Marcus said. His voice was no longer the quiet rumble of a passenger trying to avoid conflict. It was the voice of a man who commanded thousands of employees. You can't come back on board," Miller stammered, blocking the doorway. "This is my aircraft. I denied you passage." David Thorne stepped forward, thrusting a legal document into Miller's chest. "Actually, Richard, it's his aircraft. This is a cease and desist order, stripping you of your command, effective immediately." Miller looked at the paper. He looked at Marcus. "What?" "Move," Marcus said. He walked past the stunned captain and re-entered the first-class cabin. The atmosphere inside was electric. The passengers were still seated, whispering furiously. When Marcus walked in, uncuffed and flanked by suits, the silence returned instantly. Tiffany, who was still dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue in the galley, froze. She dropped her water cup. It splashed onto the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. Marcus stopped in the middle of the aisle. He looked at the passengers. He saw Mrs. Vance, looking worried. He saw Mr. Henderson, looking confused. He saw the influencer, phone raised high, live streaming the whole thing to thousands of viewers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice projecting clearly, "I apologize for the delay and the disruption. My name is Marcus Sterling. I am the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, and as of this afternoon, the new owner of Royal Horizon Airlines." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The influencer's mouth dropped open. "I boarded this flight undercover to assess the service standards," Marcus continued, his eyes locking onto Gavin, who was shrinking into the corner of the galley. "And I have found them lacking." "He's lying!" Tiffany shrieked, her voice cracking. "He's just a crazy passenger. Captain, get him out of here." Marcus turned slowly to face her. "Tiffany Reed, Employee ID 49222. You denied a first-class passenger their pre-ordered meal because you gave it to the pilot. You spoke to a customer with aggression and disrespect. And worst of all," Marcus pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket. He hadn't just been typing on his laptop earlier. He had been recording audio since the meal service began. He pressed play. Tiffany's voice, tinny but clear, echoed through the cabin. "Who does he think he is? I gave the extra one to Captain Miller." Guys like that, they probably used miles or a stolen credit card. He'll be lucky if we don't have security waiting for him. The color drained from Tiffany's face. She looked like a ghost. "That is theft," Marcus said. "And profiling. But that wasn't enough for you, was it? You decided to frame me." He pointed to the cockpit door, where Captain Miller was being escorted into the cabin by the police officers. "You conspired to file a false police report claiming assault," Marcus said, his voice hard as steel. "You tried to send an innocent man to prison because you were too arrogant to admit you stole a lobster dinner." I was just following orders," Gavin blurted out, pointing a shaking finger at the captain. "Miller told us to do it. He said to get rid of you." "You coward!" Miller roared, lunging at Gavin. The police held him back. "It doesn't matter who started it," Marcus said. "You all finished it." The silence that descended upon the first-class cabin of Flight 880 was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and charged with the static electricity of imminent destruction. Captain Richard Miller stood at the threshold of the aircraft door, his chest heaving. Moments ago, he had been the god of this vessel, the supreme authority who could order a man into zip ties on a whim. Now, he was physically blocking the entrance, his body a barrier of denial against the reality marching up the stairs. Marcus Sterling stood one step below the top platform, eye level with the captain. He didn't push past him. He didn't raise his voice. He simply waited, his hands loose at his sides, his expression unreadable. Behind him, David Thorne, the general counsel for Sterling Dynamics, adjusted his rimless glasses and opened a thick leather portfolio. The two police officers who had previously arrested Marcus now stood at attention, behind the executives, their hands resting on their belts, their allegiance shifted entirely to the man with the power. "I said you cannot enter," Miller spat, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. It was thin, reeking of desperation. "The flight is closed. The manifest is sealed. You are a security risk." "The manifest is irrelevant, Richard," David Thorne said, his voice cutting through the cool night air like a scalpel. "And you are blocking the owner of the aircraft from inspecting his property. That is a second act of insubordination in under an hour. Do you really want to go for a third? Miller blinked, his eyes darting from Marcus to the police officers. He saw no sympathy in the officers' faces. He realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach that his authority had evaporated the moment Marcus stepped out of that police cruiser. Slowly, agonizingly, Miller stepped aside. Marcus walked onto the plane. The atmosphere inside was frozen in a tableau of confusion. The passengers were twisted in their seats, necks craned toward the door. The influencer in 2A was still recording, her phone battery miraculously holding on, broadcasting the drama to a rapidly growing audience of 50,000 live viewers. In the galley, Tiffany was freezing. She had been in the middle of a performative sob, her face buried in a tissue, waiting for the applause of the passengers for her bravery. But when she saw Marcus walk in, not in handcuffs, but leading a phalanx of suits and police, the sob died in her throat. She lowered the tissue. Her mascara was smeared, but the fear in her eyes was pristine. Gavin, the purser, was trying to blend into the cabinetry. He was pressing buttons on the coffee machine, pretending to be busy, but his hands were shaking so violently that the cup rattled against the saucer like a trapped moth. Marcus stopped in the center of the aisle, right between row 1 and the galley. He didn't speak immediately. He let the silence stretch. He looked at the floor, where his duffel bag had been kicked earlier. He looked at the overhead bin where his jacket had been crammed. Finally, he looked at the crew. "Lights," Marcus said softly. David Thorne nodded to the lead police officer, who reached over and flipped the main cabin switch to bright. The mood lighting vanished. The cabin was flooded with harsh, clinical white light. There were no shadows left to hide in. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus addressed the passengers first, turning his back to the crew. "I apologize for the delay. I know you just want to go home. But before this plane moves an inch, we have to conduct a little housekeeping." He turned back to the crew. They were lined up now. Miller, who had followed him in, Gavin, who had nowhere to run, and Tiffany, who looked like she was about to faint. "David," Marcus said. "Read the roll." David Thorne stepped forward, looking like an executioner in a 3-piece suit. He pulled a document from his portfolio. "Captain Richard Miller, Purser Gavin O'Connell, Flight Attendant Tiffany Reed," David read. "Please step forward." They didn't move. "Step forward," the lead police officer barked, his hand dropping to his baton. They shuffled forward, forming a ragged line in the galley entrance. They looked like school children called to the principal's office, stripped of all their arrogant veneer. "You three made a series of choices today," Marcus began, his voice low and dangerous. "You chose to judge a passenger by his clothes. You chose to deny service that was paid for. You chose to steal. And when you were caught, you chose to destroy a man's life rather than admit you were wrong." "I didn't steal anything!" Tiffany shrieked suddenly, her self-preservation instinct kicking in. "It was a mistake, a catering error. I told you." Marcus looked at her. He didn't get angry. He actually smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "A catering error," Marcus repeated. "That's an interesting theory, Tiffany. But in the world of business, we don't rely on theories. We rely on data." Marcus held up his phone. "When I connected to the plane's Wi-Fi, I didn't just check the manifest. I synced my phone with the cabin's ambient audio sensors. Royal Horizon installed them 3 years ago for quality assurance. Did you forget?" Tiffany's face went grey. "Would you like to hear the playback?" Marcus asked. "Specifically, the part where you told Gavin, and I quote, 'I gave the extra one to Captain Miller. He said he was starving.'" The gasp from the cabin was audible. Mrs. Vance in row 2 covered her mouth. The influencer whispered, "Oh my God, caught in 4K," to her stream. "And let's not forget the follow-up," Marcus continued, his eyes drilling into Gavin. "Where you, Gavin, said, 'Guys like that, they probably used miles or a stolen credit card. He'll be lucky if we don't have security waiting for him.'" Gavin flinched as if he'd been slapped. I was just blowing off steam. It was locker room talk. It didn't mean anything." "It meant everything," Marcus corrected him. "It meant you viewed me not as a customer, but as a criminal, purely because of how I look. And because of that bias, you felt justified in what you did next." Marcus turned to Captain Miller. The big man was sweating profusely now, rivers of perspiration running down his red face. "And you, Captain," Marcus said, "the worst of them all. You didn't just eat the meal, you weaponized your rank. You declared a security emergency. You lied to air traffic control. You diverted airport resources. Do you have any idea how much it costs to roll a SWAT team to a tarmac? Do you know who pays for that?" "I am the captain," Miller blustered, trying to summon one last shred of dignity. "I have discretion. If I feel a passenger is a threat—" "I was sitting down," Marcus shouted, his voice finally breaking its calm tether, booming through the cabin. "I was typing on a laptop. The only threat on this plane was you." Marcus took a deep breath, composing himself. He nodded to David. "Proceed with the administrative phase." David Thorne handed 3 thick envelopes to the crew members. "This is your formal notice of termination," David stated. "For cause, effective immediately." Miller stared at the envelope in his hand. You can't just fire me. I have a contract. I have the union. You have to go through arbitration. This is illegal." "Actually, Richard," David said smoothly, "Clause 14, Section B of your contract states that any employee found committing a felony on company property forfeits all employment protections. And since you filed a false police report, a felony, and conspired to defraud a passenger, another felony, your contract is void." "My pension," Miller whispered, his hands shaking. "I'm 2 years away from full retirement. The pension fund, almost $2 million. "Gone," David said simply. "The moral turpitude clause in the pension agreement is very specific. You leave with nothing but the contents of your pockets." Miller looked like he had been punched in the gut. He staggered back against the galley counter. 30 years of flying. 30 years of building a nest egg. Gone in an hour because he wanted a lobster and didn't like the look of a black man in a hoodie. "But we aren't done," Marcus said. "That was just the business part. Now comes the justice part." Marcus turned to the 2 police officers. "Officers, I am formally pressing charges against all 3 individuals for filing a false police report, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unlawful imprisonment." "Wait!" Gavin screamed. He threw his hands up. "It wasn't me. It was her." He pointed a trembling finger at Tiffany. "She came up with the idea. She said, 'Let's say he hit me.' I told her it was a bad idea. I just went along with it because I was scared of the captain." "You liar!" Tiffany lunged at him, her fingernails clawing at his face. "You handed me the water to put on my eyes. You told me to cry. Enough!" The lead officer stepped in, shoving them apart. "Hands behind your backs. Now!" The sight was pathetic. The unified front of arrogance they had presented earlier shattered instantly into backstabbing and cowardice. The officers spun Gavin around first. The click, click, click of the handcuffs echoed in the silent cabin. Then Tiffany. She was sobbing uncontrollably now. "My baby. I have a baby. Please, sir, Mr. Sterling, please don't do this. I'm a single mum." Marcus stepped closer to her. He looked down at her tear-streaked face. For a moment, the cabin held its breath. Would he show mercy? "You have a child," Marcus said softly. "And yet, you were willing to take a father away from his family tonight. If your plan had worked, I would be in a holding cell right now. I would be facing years in prison for assault. My reputation would be ruined. My company would suffer. Did you think about my family when you were putting on that performance with the tissues?" Tiffany looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "Mercy is for mistakes, Tiffany," Marcus said, his voice hard. "Malice gets justice. Officer, take her!" She was cuffed, wailing loudly as the metal bit into her wrists. Finally, it was Captain Miller's turn. He didn't fight. He looked broken. The officer pulled his arms back. The captain's uniform, once a symbol of absolute authority, now looked like a costume on a sad, old man. "One more thing," Marcus said, as the officer began to lead Miller away. "Captain." Miller stopped and looked back, his eyes dead. "Your epaulets," Marcus said. "You aren't a captain anymore. And I don't want you wearing my company's insignia while you're being booked into county jail." Miller's face crumbled. It was the final humiliation. With clumsy, cuffed hands, he couldn't do it. "Allow me," the officer said. He reached out and ripped the Velcro epaulets, 4 gold stripes, from Miller's shoulders. He handed them to Marcus. Marcus held the stripes in his hand. They felt light, cheap. "Get them off my plane," Marcus ordered. The procession began. It was a slow, agonizing walk of shame. The police led the 3 former crew members down the aisle of the first-class cabin. As they passed row 1, Mr. Henderson, the man who had eaten his steak while Marcus starved, looked down at his shoes, unable to watch. But Mrs. Vance in row 2 wasn't looking away. She was sitting up straight, her eyes bright with a fierce vindication. As Tiffany was dragged past, stumbling and weeping, Mrs. Vance leaned out. "It costs nothing to be kind, dear," the old woman said, her voice clear as a bell. "But being cruel, that just cost you everything." "Move it," the officer said, pushing Tiffany forward. They reached the door and disappeared into the night, down the stairs to the waiting cruisers. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the cabin ceiling for a few more moments, then faded as the cars drove away. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. It was the silence of a storm that had finally broken. Marcus stood at the front of the cabin. He felt exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a deep weariness in his bones. But he straightened his shoulders. He was still the host. "David," Marcus said, "call the reserve crew. Tell them double time if they can get here in 20 minutes. And tell catering to restock the entire plane. Everything. Caviar, champagne, lobster. For everyone. Economy included." "Yes, sir," David said, typing furiously on his phone. Marcus turned to the first-class passengers. They were staring at him with a mixture of awe and fear. They realized they were in the presence of a titan. "I am sorry for the theater," Marcus said, his tone softening. "I just wanted a quiet flight to LA. "Don't apologize, son," Mrs. Vance said, trembling slightly as she stood up. "That was the best in-flight entertainment I've seen in 80 years. A nervous chuckle ran through the cabin. The tension broke. "Mr. Sterling?" The influencer spoke up, her voice small. "Is it okay if... I live-streamed that. Is that okay?" Marcus looked at her phone. He knew the PR team would have a heart attack, but he also knew the truth was his best weapon. "Did you catch the part where I offered everyone a refund?" Marcus asked with a wry smile. "Yes. Everyone is going crazy in the chat." "Then keep it," Marcus said. "Let the world see what happens when Royal Horizon forgets who pays the bills." He walked over to seat 1A, his seat, the seat that had started it all. He looked at the crumpled foil tray of cold chicken still sitting on the tray table where Tiffany had slammed it. He picked it up and dropped it into the trash compactor in the galley. Then he turned to Mrs. Vance. "Ma'am," Marcus said, "I believe I promised you a seat upgrade." "Oh no, I couldn't possibly," she protested, waving a hand. "I'm fine in 2B. "I insist," Marcus said, gesturing to the suite. "It has a door, and I'm told the privacy is excellent for getting some rest after a traumatic event." Mrs. Vance beamed. She gathered her purse and moved to seat 1A. She looked like a queen ascending a throne. "And you?" she asked, patting the leather armrest. "Where will you sit, Mr. CEO?" Marcus looked at the empty seat in 2B. Then he looked back toward the curtain of economy class. He could hear the murmurs of the people back there. Families, students, people who had saved up for months for this ticket. They had been delayed, scared, and confused. They deserved to see the new owner, too. "I think," Marcus said, picking up his battered leather duffel bag, "I'm going to take a walk to the back. There's a middle seat open in row 42. I want to know how the coffee tastes back there." He turned to David Thorne. "David, you take first class. I'll see you in Los Angeles." "Sir?" David looked shocked. "You're flying coach?" "A good leader leads from the front," Marcus said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "But a smart leader knows what's happening in the back." He walked through the curtain into economy. "Excuse me," Marcus said to a stunned teenager sitting in the aisle seat of row 42. "Is this seat taken?" The teenager shook his head, mouth agape. Marcus squeezed into the middle seat, stowed his bag, and buckled his belt. He pulled his hoodie up. He was just a passenger again. But as the plane finally pushed back from the gate and the engines roared to life, Marcus Sterling closed his eyes and smiled. The air in the cabin tasted different now. It didn't taste like fear. It tasted like justice. And as the wheels lifted off the runway, leaving the corrupt crew behind in the hands of the law, Marcus knew that Royal Horizon was finally heading in the right direction. That night, the Invisible Man in seat 1A didn't just clear his name, he cleaned house. Captain Miller, Gavin, and Tiffany thought their uniforms gave them the right to bully a passenger. But they forgot that true power doesn't need a badge. It needs integrity. They lost their careers, their reputations, and their freedom, all because they refused to serve a meal with respect. If you enjoyed this story of massive justice and hard karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who hates rude customer service, and subscribe for more stories where the underdog wins and the arrogant get exactly what they deserve. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever been judged by your appearance? See you in the next video.